Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, November 24th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The game against Michigan in just 3 days. Ohio State enters the biggest game on its schedule this weekend, fresh off the best game it has played probably all season. The Buckeyes just vaporized Michigan State last Saturday, jumping out to a 49-0 halftime lead, cruising to a 56-7 win. So why did things go so well against the Spartans? And possibly more importantly for Buckeye fans, can they do the same thing this weekend against the Wolverines? My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's X's and O's guru, Ross Fulton. Ross, thanks for joining me.
Happy to, Tom.
So I guess let's start with some context here, because as soon as Ohio State put up a couple early scores, everyone in the world was rushing to Twitter to tell you, well, actually, Michigan State has the worst pass defense in the country. And yes, by total yardage allowed, that is technically true, but by a bunch of other more advanced and, yes, more insightful metrics, they're pretty much average nationally. So, I mean, how would you describe the Spartans defense, just to sort of frame the conversation we're about to have about the Ohio State offense?
Yeah, you said it. Total yards is a terrible stat to use for anything. I mean, if you want to just go even simply yards per pass attempt, I think college football nerds talked about it on their show this week. Michigan State's like 34th, or maybe they're 41st now. I think in like the advanced stats, they're like, their defense is somewhere honestly around Ohio State's. I think that, it's if you look at that and like that's what you want to say, I mean, I guess that's fine, but I think it's kind of hard to argue with, again, on all the advanced metrics, what Ohio State's passing offense is doing.
Ross is being polite. I will be real. Total yardage is a stat for children and imbeciles. All right, moving on. What was it that made them such a good matchup from Ohio State's perspective? If they are not, in fact, the worst defense in the country, what made them such a good matchup from Ohio State's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just that, I mean, Ohio State is a good matchup against anyone at some level. I mean, most teams aren't bringing, the firepower to bear in the back end to handle it. But, I mean, I think Michigan State, like a lot of teams, they're geared to stop the run. A lot of what they do, they like to, to some extent do what Ohio State particularly used to like to do is, spin down and play to one high and play cover three, get an extra hat in the box. They like to use hot pressures, but particularly from the inside. And so, they want to take away your double teams, gap you out, limit the run game. And they just, that's leaving a lot of space in the back end. It's like sort of, they don't face teams in the Big Ten, or it's not even a Big Ten. There's very few teams in college football, really none at this year, that can do what Ohio State can do. And so, they brought the hot pressure with the two inside linebackers, and Ohio State saw a lot of green grass and just was able to take advantage of it. Or they couldn't, stay vertical enough. And then when they tried to get super deep, Ohio State would just take the free yards running the football. And so, teams earlier this year, like we've talked about, Penn State, Nebraska, they were overloading the box or bringing guys off the edge. And that was causing Ohio State some problems, getting behind schedule or failing a fourth down, little things. And we're like, at the time, I was like, these are just little things. Like if they clean this up, and they've cleaned it up by using a lot of bubble screens, pre-snap, what I call their reliefs, because CJ Stroud basically just sees like, does the wide receiver who's going to block have outside leverage on the guy he needs to block? And if yeah, I'm going to throw that screen. And that takes care of a lot of that, like cheating towards the box.
I don't think I mentioned this off the top of the show, but this we're just going to be looking at the Ohio State offense today. We'll do the defense later in the week. And, we've talked a lot about those reliefs on previous shows. We've also talked about how OSU used motion and sweeps to manipulate the defense in the passing game. But last weekend, they actually did it in the run game as well. Can you sort of explain how they did that?
Yeah. And so again, they take advantage of a couple things. So that jet sweep action, again, same sort of principle as some of those wide receiver screens, which is, it's a way to hold the backside or threaten, so that you open up the front side run, but it also forces the secondary to react in one way or the other. So, there were a couple times, for instance, on the, where they ran the jet, and, Michigan State, the way they wanted to react to motion was not react a lot, like, right, just kind of shuffle, so that create opportunities. And then they got hit with a couple of those. And so then on the, Chris Olave, his second touchdown, Ohio State again faked the jet to Garrett Wilson, and Michigan State to handle that went to, it's called three cloud. So it's cover three, but you keep the corner as one of the underneath players so that he can set the edge. And so, you're trying to have someone there to cover it, but now you've got two safeties as your three deep defenders. And, they bit on the action and it allowed Chris Olave to get behind them. So again, you're both keeping teams out of the box against the run, and you're providing eye candy and just forcing the defensive backfield to adjust.
All right. Eye candy is a good term. You also used a good term this week. How Michigan State mugged their linebackers. They did not go and steal their marble rye. So how the Buckeyes were able to take advantage of that. I don't know that we've ever actually discussed mugging your linebackers before. So can you explain what that means and why OSU was able to make them pay for doing it?
Yeah. So again, mugging just means like pre-snap, the linebackers are lining up head up on the offensive line or right over them. So essentially, like, at the same level the defensive line is. And, you do that, generally speaking, when you want to bring pressures. Now the offensive line doesn't know who's going to rush. And you can then use a bunch of variety, because then they have to, like, pre-snap, the offensive line has to count. And so they may account for one of those mugged up linebackers in the pass protection scheme, and then they drop off and you get a free rusher. Michigan likes to mug their linebackers a lot, for instance, and likes to use a lot of variety. And so, again, though, Michigan State was doing it. And if you do it and then you're dropping those linebackers out, you have a lot of grass to cover, particularly that, you're playing cover three. Those linebackers have to get out to the underneath zones. And so, again, just another example of Michigan State was very focused on the interior, and Ohio State was just not going to play long, and they were just going to hit them in the flats and then over the top.
Ohio State has been a lot more efficient in the red zone in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that was a big issue earlier in the season. You wrote about a really neat pair of plays, I think it was back-to-back, that involved Julian Fleming. So what did they do with Julian Fleming in the red zone that helped them put up a 7 instead of a 3?
Yeah, and I think, in a bigger picture, a lot of what they're doing in the red zone or yardage is reflective of what they're doing generally, right? And so, you're seeing a lot more wide receiver motion and then using off of that, like, hard play action. And so with Fleming, they brought him in what I would call short motion. So he just comes from out wide towards the tackle or the tight end. And the first play, they block duo, which, so if you see it all the time when people run duo, right? So like because you need all those down blocks. And so teams tend to bring that guy in, like a wide receiver in, to sort of block down on the edge. So they run duo, then they use the same motion, but this time they fake like they're running the football. Fleming, acts like he's going to block, and then basically runs a pop pass, a delayed release. And it was an easy touchdown. So again, you're seeing Ohio State be, a little bit more creative, for lack of a better word, but I would say relying on the pass more, or the threat of the pass in combination with the run in short yardage or goal line. So again, you're just avoiding those situations where, teams are coming off the edge and you don't have enough blockers for them.
The fun thing after every week before the Michigan game is people want to talk about the week, the game before the Michigan game for about 5 minutes afterwards. And everyone's like, all right, it's Michigan week. Let's talk about Michigan. So we don't normally spend a lot of time looking forward, but it's Michigan week. Let's talk about Michigan. So how much similarity is there between what the Wolverines and Spartans do scheme-wise? Or, some of the stuff that Ohio State was doing? I mean, you talked about mugging the linebackers. Is there a lot of carryover from what Ohio State did last week that'll carry over to this week, or is this kind of you're starting fresh?
No, there's some. I mean, I think, one thing, Michigan, so Ryan Day in his press conference called them, an NFL style defense, which I do think is an appropriate term because, Mike Macdonald came from the Ravens. He uses a ton of packages, right? So like they'll run 3 down front. They run a lot of 2-4. They'll play every coverage out there, but they'll play a lot of cover 3. They'll play a lot of cover 4. They'll mix a bunch of blitzes, zone blitzes particularly, but like they do try to protect their corners. So as Ohio State fans well know, what got Don Brown in trouble against Ohio State was he was going to play cover 1 all the time and got beat accordingly for doing so. And so they have the same corners, older, but the same. And, so they've done a lot to protect those guys. So they'll run like, you and I've talked about like cover 4 mod, for instance, which means man only deep. So they'll give up some of the underneath stuff to protect themselves deep. And so, again, all the play that always keeps Ohio State going is that like far hash throw on the comeback routes to Olave and Wilson. And that like keeps them ahead of schedule. And it just makes it really tough for defense to defend them. So that should be there. The other thing is because they are an NFL, because McDonald brings an NFL philosophy to it, he very much wants to like be in the right package and have the right call on. And so against Michigan State, they really struggle with tempo. They struggled some against Penn State with it. Again, you saw Ohio State really exploit Clemson last year. Brent Venables wants to do the same thing and wait till the last minute. And so I'm sure you'll see a lot of like the sugar huddle that Ohio State likes to do, where they huddle and rush up to the line of scrimmage. After they hit a big play, go rocket tempo, get up and snap it. And so Michigan to me is a much more diverse defense than what Michigan State provided. But like at some level, it's going to come down to, how well does Ohio State handle picking up blitzes? How well does CJ Stroud see the picture? And then, I think with Aiden Hutchinson, I think some of the same things that they use against George Karlaftis apply. Using different pass protections to get doubles on him, or just have hits coming from different locations. The jet sweeps that kind of put him in conflict, things to slow him down. He is a really good player, but there are ways, like the Nebraskas and Marylands of the world have neutralized this guy somewhat.
But you successfully anticipated my next 2 questions. So I was going to ask about tempo, and then I was going to ask about Aiden Hutchinson. So instead, I'm going to ask you, how would you attack the Michigan defense if you were Ryan Day? I mean, they have been better against the pass and the run this season in terms of the percentage of an opponent's typical production. So do you come out and try and pound them? I mean, that is potentially one way to try and wear down Aiden Hutchinson is let DeJuan Jones try and get his body into you for 30 times during the course of the game and see how you feel at the end of it, or do you go right after them with what is still? I mean, you mentioned the corners. It is still the same corners, and DJ Turner's been better, and they haven't really been tested though. So do you go after the not entirely tested defensive backfield? Do you try and pound them? Like what's the game plan if you're Ryan Day this weekend?
Yeah, I think you don't deviate from what you've done the last 2 games that have worked so well, especially early, which is I'm going to run mid-zone and attach wide receiver reliefs to it, and I'm going to test or probe how exactly Michigan wants to play me. And it creates an easy way to do it, right? Because if you have the numbers, you throw the reliefs. If Michigan will this year, they'll play a gap down. They'll play with 2 wide safeties and be a gap down, or have linebackers sit on the RPOs and try to gain back a gap with a defensive tackle or lineman. And, at the end of the day, like Ohio State has all these opportunities on the edge because teams still worry about them running the ball at them. And so, if they do that, you take your yards with Trayvon Henderson. I mean, we saw that against Michigan State. Michigan State started trying to play Tampa too, and Ohio State just would run the ball. And so, I think you kind of have to take a little bit how they want to play them. I think, again, a key is sort of making sure you get a clear picture though, and because they will move around some, and that did cause problems with Penn State, and so you just have to I think you want to create a clear picture by starting with those reliefs attached to the run game, and then go from there, and then hopefully when they start creeping up, you get opportunities downfield.
One thing I've noticed with Michigan is they will try and be very physical on those crossers with the linebackers, and in that like mesh area, they had I think Jahan Dotson just got drilled on one of those on the crossing route, one of the ones right at the end of the game. That they get very physical on that if you're running mesh or whatever. If you're Mike McDonald, like what though is the game plan? Are you most concerned about the run? Are you just trying to keep it? I mean, you mentioned earlier you're basically trying to keep everything in front of you. Is that the game plan? Just try and make them walk, methodically work their way down the field rather than hitting something big? Like what is plan A for Michigan this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still try to do the Penn State Nebraska game plan, for lack of a better word. Like you don't want to give up the 50-yard touchdown, right? Like you want to force Ohio State to drive. Maybe Ohio State will shoot themselves in the foot. Maybe you'll get a short yardage stop. To me, I'm going to try to jump my defensive line around and do a bunch of games. I mean, they're not like, they don't do it as much as a Penn State does, but you like gotta, try to gain up front by getting behind schedule with that. And then I'm just going to mix up coverages a lot. I don't think you want, when Ohio State goes check with me, you don't want Ryan Day to have like a clear picture of what kind of coverage he's getting, because like that's where he's at his best and will beat it. One high, jump to two, vice versa, and just like literally roll through coverages because you have them, and you might as well just try to, you hope you get Stroud confused or just not seeing the picture well. I think it is a sort of a bend but don't break within that.
All right. So like first 10 minutes of the game, first quarter, maybe, what is one thing that you could see on Saturday that would make you think, aha, Ohio State's offense is in great shape? And what is one thing that you could see that would make you think this might be like a real tough 4-quarter slog or worse for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. So up front, I think if Ohio State's like having trouble picking up stunts or games or blitzes, obviously that's concerning. If Stroud looks, confused or I guess hesitant, or maybe like he's not seeing it well, that would be concerning. If Ohio State, by contrast, has a pretty clear picture and is hitting those reliefs and moving the ball on the ground, then I think you should feel pretty good about it. Even if I don't think you can expect quite what they saw last Saturday, but Ohio State definitely, they're going to need to score.
Yeah, this is probably not a game you're going to win, 13-9 or like some previous Michigan Ohio State games. So, we will have Ross back on later on this week, either Thursday or Friday, to talk about the other side of the ball, about the Ohio State defense and how they will match up against Michigan. We will have him on a little later in the week to talk about that. But for now, Ross, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to do it.
And if you want to get a full update on the Buckeyes, who moved up to number 2 in the college football playoff rankings last night, you can check that out at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Tony Gerderman and Kevin Noon and I spent about 2 hours on YouTube Live breaking down everything, what it all means for Ohio State, why it might be a bigger deal than you think that Alabama is now behind Ohio State, and much more. That's all at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. That will also drop as a bonus episode on the Buckeye Weekly feed, or that'll be a regular episode on the Buckeye Weekly feed on either Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, depending on when that gets all done. We'll also have a bonus episode on the Morning Scoop feed on Wednesday around lunchtime. Tony Gerderman and I took some of your questions and answered some of those on the Buckeye Weekly, on the Morning Scoop feed. And then we'll also be back later in the week with a bonus episode on the Buckeye Weekly feed. We are doing a lot of podcasts this week, but we know you guys, a lot of you are traveling. A lot of you are just looking for a little more Ohio State football content in the lead up to what is a massive, massive Ohio State game. We are doing our very best to fill your ears with content all week long. You can find all of those on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And then also on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.